Here's why Kody Brown's version of fatherhood often feels less like guidance and more like sibling rivalry dressed up in authority. Kody has a long history of turning parenting into performance, and his treatment of Gwen is just the latest chapter in that familiar story. According to Christine, he told Gwen he would not attend her engagement party, watched her break down in tears, and then delivered a line that sounded more like a wounded ego than a caring parent. "Don't try to manipulate me with your tears." That wasn't wisdom. That wasn't protection. That was punishment. It felt like payback, not parenting. We saw the groundwork for this in Season 18, Episode 9, when Christine, Janelle, and several of the older kids talked about possibly meeting with Robyn. Garrison immediately said no, and Gwen pointed out what many viewers already recognized, that Robyn would likely respond with tears or emotional pressure. That observation, accurate or not, was treated as an unforgivable offense. In this family, questioning Robyn's innocence is practically heresy. So when Gwen later cried over her father's rejection, Kody seized the moment. He repeated her own words back at her like a verdict. Not to teach her anything, but to prove his loyalty to Robyn. It was less about Gwen's feelings and more about winning a quiet, petty point. Kody did eventually show up at the engagement party, but let's be honest about what really motivated that decision. Cameras were there. So was a paycheck. For Kody, that combination has always been far more reliable than emotional responsibility. The setup was perfect. Get paid, look supportive, and reveal absolutely nothing personal. And yes, the couple has complained about how invasive the show can be, which might earn a little sympathy, until you remember they continue to cash the checks with enthusiasm. Anyone who has dealt with narcissistic-style parenting can recognize the pattern. When children show emotion, it's labeled manipulation. When the parent shows emotion, it's treated like sacred truth. In Kody's world, his feelings are holy. Everyone else's are suspect. That's why his reactions often resemble a sulking older sibling more than a steady father. Someone desperate to win a contest nobody should even be competing in. Even small moments expose the same imbalance. Take the incident where he tattled on Solomon for putting a phone in his pocket, followed by Robyn's tired, almost resigned response. It was a tiny scene, but it spoke volumes. Kody wasn't guiding. He wasn't teaching. He was reporting, complaining, and stepping away from the responsibility of being the adult in the room. This style of fatherhood by punishment doesn't stop with Gwen. It stretches across years and milestones. His selective attendance at major life events, including Logan's wedding, doesn't feel like thoughtful boundary setting. It feels like leverage. His presence becomes a reward for loyalty and a consequence for disagreement. Participation is no longer about love or support. It's about control. And that's what makes all of this so unsettling. Kody doesn't just withdraw affection. He uses it. He turns moments that should be about his children into silent negotiations about obedience. In the end, his parenting doesn't look like leadership. It looks like competition. And sadly, it's his own children who keep paying the price. And when you remember how much of this family's story has never made it to the screen, it becomes clear these moments are probably just the tip of a much larger iceberg. This is already a complicated family, yet Kody still manages to stand out, and not in a way that resembles steady, dependable fatherhood. Have you ever noticed how often Kody seems to compete with his sons instead of connecting with them? His appearance on Special Forces was promoted as a heartfelt tribute to fatherhood. But if you listen closely, that version of fatherhood applies to only a very specific group of children. When Kody talks about his kids, the list somehow keeps shrinking, until it mostly includes the children he shares with Robyn. The original 13 fade into the background, like old chapters he'd rather not reread. The pattern is hard to miss. Several of his adult children reportedly found out he was doing the show only after it was already happening. That fits perfectly with his long-standing habit of editing them out of his personal storyline. Yet, in interviews, he said he would have loved to do the show with his two oldest sons. Now, if that phrase were honest, we'd be talking about Logan and Hunter, both of whom would likely outperform him with a level of discipline and maturity he spent years sidestepping. But Robyn happens to have two sons. And suddenly, the family tree gets quietly rearranged. Then came the explanation that he didn't even know he could bring someone with him. The line was delivered with the kind of sincerity usually reserved for late-night infomercials. And of course, Robyn would never allow her sons to sign up for anything that might mess up their hair or stir up uncomfortable emotions. So, the excuse works beautifully on more than one level. Off camera, the story unravels even further. One of his sons has publicly said he didn't even know his father was filming the show. That little detail pokes a large hole in the carefully crafted warrior dad narrative. It seems obvious what Kody was hoping for, that watching him struggle through obstacle courses would magically restore the respect he spent years losing. But respect doesn't come from dramatic music and slow-motion training shots, especially not when some of his own sons have served in real military roles. Their experiences required discipline, accountability, and real courage. Compared to that, Kody's reality TV endurance tour feels less like bonding and more like late-in-life competition with people who passed him long ago. That competitive instinct, dressed up as connection, exposes another uncomfortable truth. The original 13 children were never the real audience for his redemption story. If their opinions truly mattered, he wouldn't be reinventing himself on television. He'd be calling them, apologizing, and listening. Instead, he keeps choosing reinvention over reconciliation. Even at a son's funeral, his reported behavior only deepened the cracks, pushing already fragile relationships even further apart. And perhaps the most honest moment of all came when he admitted he only really cares about his minor children. That admission grows more uncomfortable with every passing year. He continues to ignore so many of his children. The younger daughters outside the favored household barely register in his daily life or in public discussions about the family. Their absence feels less accidental and more systemic, as if invisibility has quietly become their assigned role. Looking ahead, it's not hard to imagine how these dynamics will play out once the youngest children grow up and no longer serve as his built-in excuse for selective parenting. By then, Kody will be approaching retirement age, an era he doesn't seem particularly prepared for, and Robyn's spending habits are unlikely to make the financial landscape any gentler than the emotional one. The two of them may find themselves sitting in the stillness they helped create, older, restless, and clinging to the few children still willing to stay in their orbit. And if Special Forces ever dares to confront him with the son he keeps referencing without ever naming, the world may finally see whether this fatherhood storyline can survive real confrontation or whether it's just another obstacle he hopes to sprint past. One thing is certain. Polished reality TV bravado should never be confused with real toughness. There is a peculiar, almost medicinal urge that pulls even the most loyal viewers back to watch a familiar personality face a humbling moment. And honestly, who can resist that impulse? There's something oddly therapeutic about watching an overly self-important figure get introduced to mud with the enthusiasm of a spa treatment gone terribly wrong. A surprising number of emotional ailments seem to clear up instantly. To his credit, and to the disappointment of those hoping for a swift collapse, Kody handled the physical challenges reasonably well. But being able to do push-ups doesn't rewrite a personality. His attitude remained as abrasive as ever, and the sideways looks from fellow contestants told their own quiet story. His casual misogyny alone made one thing obvious. teamwork was never going to be his natural environment. The upcoming hand-to-hand combat portion promises even more chances for Gravity, Mud, and fellow contestants to do what polite society no longer does: hold him firmly in place. Realistically, he will probably last longer than most viewers would prefer, which at least guarantees more reminders that bravado fades quickly when confronted by professionals who have lived far tougher realities than anything staged for television. Physical strength can only carry a person so far when their ego refuses to take orders from equals. The moment Kody is required to defer to another participant instead of an instructor, the fuse is already lit. Viewers have already enjoyed the moment he tried to coach someone, only to be shut down firmly, directly, and with language refreshingly free of politeness by a staff member who had no interest in indulging his self-appointed authority. There seems to be a shared fantasy among viewers, the chance to gently, but firmly, introduce his face to a patch of mud while holding on to that last determined strip of hair, clinging to his scalp with the same devotion he brings to his tough guy image. The cameras, of course, capture everything. The rehearsed action movie stare, the carefully practiced jaw clench, the unmistakable feeling that this man has absolutely stood in front of a mirror practicing how to look intimidating. You almost admire the commitment. Almost. Now, let's talk about something few people are willing to say out loud about Robyn Brown's so-called moral compass. It doesn't point north. It points wherever it benefits her. Robyn appears to measure her success as a mother by one shining standard: whether her children remain sexually inactive until a wedding ring appears. It's a simple goal, really. Yet she has managed to turn it into a full household ideology, complete with emotional sheltering, isolation, and a level of supervision that would make a Victorian chaperone reach for smelling salts. This obsession seems rooted in her own history. By her own timeline, she preached chastity and then, almost immediately, failed to live up to it. What followed appears to be a lifelong mixture of guilt and projection. Watching the older Brown children grow up, leave home, and, gasp, form adult relationships without collapsing into chaos must have been deeply inconvenient. Their careers, marriages, and independence quietly dismantle her argument that sexual restraint is the only path to moral or emotional stability. So, she holds tight to the one space she can still fully control: the bodies, choices, and autonomy of her own children. Meanwhile, the fairy tale of her own perfectly chaste courtship with Kody stretches credibility. A man doesn't drive 5 hours each way, stay overnight, and manage fiancé-level sleep arrangements purely out of spiritual discipline. And that famous engagement photo, an accidental work of honesty, doesn't exactly whisper restraint. The official story insists on virtue. The visual evidence suggests something a little more human. If one were feeling generous, it could all be framed as deeply reverent temple worship. After all, scripture becomes wonderfully flexible when it needs to be. Robyn's worldview is built on a form of gender thinking where women must remain gentle, quiet in pain, modest in posture, and obedient in presentation. Conveniently, she fits the look Kody seems to prefer. And that contrast only grows sharper as his interest in his other wives steadily faded. In the end, her morality doesn't function as guidance. It functions as a gate, one she guards closely, especially when it allows her to stay exactly where she is in the family hierarchy. Her children have clearly been shaped to fit that worldview, respectful to the point of reverence, emotionally bonded to their stepfather in ways that invite more questions than comfort. The normal push and pull of childhood independence is strangely missing. Instead, what we see is gratitude performed with the intensity of true believers. Aurora, especially, carries the energy of someone who has been assigned a savior and reminded daily to be thankful for him. Robyn's mythology doesn't stop with parenting. She once explained that a woman remains married until she has sex with another man. It's a theological loophole so unusual, It conveniently rewrites her own timeline. By that logic, she and Kody couldn't have truly married until she was fully divorced, and the act that finalized that divorce also just happened to legitimize their relationship. It's an impressive bit of doctrinal gymnastics. Nothing like rewriting the rulebook mid-play to bless the outcome you already chose. The emotional environment inside her household only deepens the concern. The children's fragility, their anxious attachment, and their heavy dependence suggest something more than strict parenting. Some observers have compared it to a Munchausen-like dynamic, not in a medical sense, but in the emotional one. Dependence encouraged rather than healed. Whether intentional or not, the result is the same. Children whose identities revolve around their mother's fears, moods, and approval. Robyn's moral universe, when you step back, is actually very small. Premarital sex is the ultimate sin. Controlling her children's development is the prevention. Creative theology is the cleanup. Everything else, emotional health, independence, adulthood, gets quietly pushed aside to protect the story. It may be a small kingdom, but she rules it with absolute certainty. Now let's talk about one of Kody Brown's favorite excuses. He has never encountered a woman's emotion he couldn't immediately blame on hormones. So when Christine expressed discomfort around his friend, the same friend who suggested the church might welcome Kody back if he simply abandoned 3 wives, Kody reached for the classic line, "It's just your PMs." A reasonable boundary instantly became crazy behavior, courtesy of Kody's enthusiastic gaslighting. The most painful part wasn't even his comment. It was Christine believing him. She had convinced herself, after her own research, that women are prisoners of their biology. It's an old, tired idea, but hearing it repeated inside a family that claims spiritual progress makes it no less heartbreaking. And then came the silence. Not one sister-wife defended her. Janelle literally walked away. But in Kody's world of emotional scarcity, standing up for each other carries a price. Support one wife, and you risk losing access to him, and by extension, risking your children's relationship with their father. In that environment, loyalty between women becomes a luxury no one is allowed to afford. The irony grows even sharper with the release of Christine's recent book, Where the Hormones Made Me Do It narrative returns, this time wrapped in the language of perimenopause. It's a reminder of how deeply that belief was planted, and how long it took her to begin pulling it out by the roots. As if Kody's friend making a wildly inappropriate comment somehow required a medical diagnosis to explain Christine's perfectly reasonable anger. Apparently, even in hindsight, every emotion must still kneel before the altar of Kody's supposed infallibility. Rewatching that episode also reveals something quietly fascinating about Janelle's role. First, she helpfully stirs the pot by suggesting a visit with the very man Christine can't stand. Then, she casually reminds everyone that each wife must, at some point, take her turn in Kody's hot seat while he offers his homespun theories about women's emotional instability. Only when Kody stretches his PM's theory to cover all women does Janelle briefly remember her feminist instincts. It's a quick flare of resistance before the moment passes. Altogether, the scene feels like a textbook example of a patriarchal system so deeply embedded that the people living inside it no longer recognize how absurd it sounds. One almost looks forward to a future moment, perhaps on a brutal reality competition, when Kody's bluster finally meets a force he can't dismiss as hormonal. And then there's the flirting. Nothing drains the energy from an episode faster than Kody and Robyn's painfully scripted attempts at romance. The show has reached a strange achievement. It hasn't driven viewers away through overexposure or franchise fatigue, but through the pure gravitational pull of secondhand embarrassment radiating from these two. After the latest episode, it becomes obvious the franchise itself isn't the problem. A series focused solely on the ex-wives and their children would be instantly more engaging. Meri now carries a calm, genuine happiness that feels real. Janelle remains the quiet, steady backbone she has always been. Christine, mercifully easing back from last season's overly enthusiastic David era, has returned to being warm, natural, and deeply likable. Their joy feels unforced. Their conversations feel real. Their presence feels human. Then the camera cuts to Kody and Robyn, and the mood collapses. Every scene between them feels like a rehearsal that happened 5 minutes before filming. The energy is stiff, awkward, and painfully performative. They are two people pretending they haven't been functionally monogamous for a decade and largely free of plural family obligations for at least half that time. And yet, somehow, they still have no chemistry. Their attempts at flirtation only make it worse. The fake dirty talk turns the screen into a trapped elevator, stuffy, uncomfortable, and something you want to escape as quickly as possible. Kody's odd vocal noises and exaggerated tongue movements don't suggest charm or confidence. They suggest a man who has never been properly introduced to a mirror. Robyn, supposedly the romantic counterbalance, doesn't help. Her on-camera presence feels evasive. Her eyes dart everywhere except toward the interviewer, as if she's trying to emotionally step out of her own dialogue. She looks less like a woman in love and more like someone quietly wishing the scene would end. Together, they don't feel like a couple sharing intimacy. They feel like two people reading lines from a script neither one truly believes in anymore. If this is acting, it belongs firmly in the please fast-forward category. And yet, for all the collective wishing for a spin-off focused only on the original wives and their adult children, the network has little reason to deliver it. Reality television doesn't thrive on peace. It survives on discomfort. Happiness doesn't sell nearly as well as outrage, irritation, and secondhand embarrassment. Those emotions spark debate. And debate keeps ratings alive. So, here's the uncomfortable truth. The very scenes that make viewers cringe are exactly the ones the network will continue to highlight. People are still talking about them, and in reality TV, that's the only score that counts. Now, let's return to one of the most painful moments in this family story. After refusing to accompany his daughter to surgery, after minimizing her need for medical care, after telling his wife and daughter that he had to stay with his family, as though she somehow didn't qualify, after implying a teenage girl should face major surgery alone. After all of that, she made one small request. She woke up in pain and asked to speak to her father on the phone. She didn't ask for a flight. She didn't ask for an apology. She didn't ask for a miracle. She asked for a song, a lullaby, the simplest form of comfort a parent can give. And he said no, not with a meaningful excuse, not with regret. Just, I don't feel like it. Few sentences have ever carried so much quiet cruelty. A father choosing indifference at the very moment his child needed him most. This refusal cost him nothing. It didn't inconvenience the favored household. It required no sacrifice. And yet, even that tiny gesture was too much. The pattern is unmistakable. When he is angry with a wife, the punishment lands on the children. Then, elsewhere, he performs the role of devoted father for the cameras. The contrast is devastating. Around the same time, viewers saw him carrying another child to bed during a panic attack, weeping over the agony of being away from her for 6 days. 6 days. Meanwhile, his recovering daughter's request for comfort was brushed aside like an inconvenience. The conclusion is impossible to avoid. The rejection wasn't apathy. It was punishment. In his mind, her decision to go forward with surgery without surrendering to his demands was defiance. And in his world, defiance must be met with pain. That truth is chilling, but entirely consistent with his behavior. Only someone deeply disconnected from ordinary parental instinct could respond to a child's suffering with such calculated coldness. Which brings us to the only question that truly matters. Why? Why does he repeatedly wound his own children? He rages. He withholds. He withdraws, yet he never confronts the destruction he leaves behind. His children no longer represent themselves to him. They represent the life he now resents. The past. The commitments. The wives who no longer fit his rewritten story. And so, the resentment transfers onto them. The result is behavior that feels uncomfortably close to hostility. It is a bleak portrait of a man so determined to reinvent himself that he discards anyone who reminds him of who he used to be. And nothing exposes that cruelty more clearly than the moment he refused a simple song. Subscribe for more.